Russia did the unthinkable. They attacked the very core of American power and paid the price in blood and fire. April 15th, 2025 was a day that no one could have imagined. In a single, chilling moment, the $2.1 billion B-2 Spirit bomber, the crown jewel of the U.S. Air Force, was shot down by a Russian missile traveling at Mach 14. It was the first time in history that a B-2 had ever been shot down. The event sent shockwaves from Washington all the way to the war rooms of America's allies across the globe. But what happened next was even more astonishing. Just hours later, the United States launched a counterattack like nothing anyone had ever seen. 8 stealth bombers, 30 ballistic missiles, and a carrier strike group carrying hundreds of Tomahawk missiles blanketed the skies over Russia. Overnight, Russia's vast military network went on high alert. Thousands of soldiers found themselves caught in a storm of steel they never saw coming. This wasn't just another battle. It was a brutal reminder to the world of what happens when someone dares to challenge the might of the American giant. Let's take a look at how Russia withstood America's wrath, because the numbers behind this clash and the haunting images it left behind reveal a terrifying new chapter in 21st century warfare. On the morning of April 15th, 2025, the unthinkable happened. For the first time in history, the US B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, worth $2.1 billion and considered the crown jewel of American air dominance, was shot out of the sky. This wasn't a mere accident. It was the result of Russia's latest anti-aircraft marvel, the S-500 Promé, a surface-to-air system specifically designed to hunt stealth bombers and hypersonic missiles. The B-2 was cruising silently at 50,000 feet near the Belarus border, under the false security of its radar-absorbing skin and angular design. But Russian radar crews were no amateurs. The S-500's new 90 Wayland 6A phased array radar, with a detection range of 600 kilometers, picked up a faint thermal signature, an almost imperceptible whisper in the sky that betrayed America's most advanced bomber. In just 7 seconds, the Russian operators locked onto their target, a 77N6N1 interceptor missile, traveling at a staggering Mach 14, erupted from its silo outside Smolensk. Rising through the thin air at 40 kilometers altitude, it slammed directly into the B-2. The 150-kilogram defragmentation warhead detonated with surgical precision, tearing a flaming hole through the bomber's fuselage. Eyewitnesses on the ground saw what they described as a second sun, an enormous fireball blossoming high above the treetops. Fiery debris rained down across a 6-mile radius, igniting patches of forest and sending shockwaves that rattled village windows over 20 miles away. The downed B-2 wasn't just valuable hardware. It was a message. The days of American stealth dominance were no longer untouchable. News broadcasts around the world replayed the footage of the burning wreckage, a haunting reminder that the once unimpeachable American air superiority might be fading. At the Pentagon, red lights glared across communication consoles. For decades, the B-2 had been the invisible hand of U.S. global power, capable of penetrating even the most hostile airspace with near impunity. Now, a single Russian S-500 battery had done what generations of Soviet technology had failed to do: shoot down a B-2. The implications were chilling, and for the U.S. military brass, it meant one thing: a response was coming. And it would be overwhelming. What would you do if you were the leader of the Pentagon? The U.S. response would be swift and devastating. Pentagon's response: USS Gerald R. Ford and the Steel Armada of America. The downing of the B-2 sent a shockwave through Washington like an electric pulse. Within hours, emergency briefings unfolded deep inside the Pentagon's secure chambers. The message from the Joint Chiefs was clear. This wasn't just an attack on an aircraft. It was an assault on America's strategic credibility, and it demanded a response that the world would never forget. By dusk, the USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced aircraft carrier ever built, was already steaming at 30 knots into the Baltic Sea. Weighing over 100,000 tons, it brought with it 4 guided missile cruisers, 6 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, and more than 75 stealth aircraft, including F-35C Lightning IIs and F/A-18 Super Hornets. Together, they formed a floating fortress bristling with over 500 ship-launched Tomahawk and SM-6 missiles, a devastating arsenal capable of reshaping any theater of war. But the real shock came from the skies above Missouri. The U.S. Air Force deployed 4 B-21 Raiders, America's newest generation of stealth bombers, each loaded with GBU-57AB massive ordnance penetrators, 30,000-pound bunker busters designed to pulverize 200 feet of reinforced concrete. Alongside these bombers were swarms of AGM-158 JASM-ER stealth cruise missiles, each with a range exceeding 600 miles, able to slip through radar nets like shadows. At the same time, a fleet of 30 MGM-31A Pershing II ballistic missiles was rolled out from hidden U.S. Army batteries across Europe. Upgraded with advanced hypersonic glide vehicles, these missiles could travel at over Mach 8, crossing 1,800 kilometers in mere minutes and striking within 3 meters of their targets. They weren't just tools of war. They were a stark promise that no power on Earth could challenge the U.S. without facing catastrophic consequences. Satellite feeds showed the ghostly choreography of war preparations. Carrier decks crowded with armed jets, B-21s gliding in tight aerial tanking orbits, and missile convoys crawling under thick camouflage nets. As U.S. generals briefed NATO allies, one chilling directive cut through every command channel. This would not be a token retaliation. The same S-500 system that had stunned the world by downing a U.S. stealth bomber only hours earlier. B-21 bombers and hypersonic missiles mobilize across the globe. Breathless eyes watched. For decades, America's reach had been legendary. Now it would be demonstrated again, not by speeches, but through an overwhelming, unrestrained show of power. At precisely 2:03 a.m. Moscow time, the night sky above western Russia turned into a theater of terrifying brilliance. The first wave began from the dark expanse of the Baltic Sea, where 6 U.S. destroyers and cruisers simultaneously launched a staggering 58 Tomahawk cruise missiles. The missiles shot forth in rapid succession, leaving columns of flame on the decks before disappearing low over the water. These weapons skimmed treetops at 600 miles per hour, slicing through forests and river valleys, navigating by terrain contour maps burned into their onboard systems. Russian spotters reported eerie streaks of white vapor zipping just above the ground, seconds before shockwaves flattened observation posts. Moments later, the thunder of heavy bombers arrived. From high over Belarus, 4 B-2 Spirits and 4 B-21 Raiders broke radio silence. With their bomb bays yawning open, each released a pair of 30,000-pound GBU-57AB bunker busters. The massive ordnance dropped silently at first, accelerating downward until they punched into the frozen soil at nearly Mach 1, burrowing deep before erupting in titanic subterranean blasts. The earth above each impact heaved violently, belching pillars of fire and rock hundreds of feet into the air. Seismic monitors in Poland registered the detonations as minor earthquakes. From a distance, it looked like giants had driven molten spears into Russia's heartland. Then, the sky cracked open yet again. 30 Pershing II ballistic missiles, long hidden in Poland's forests, streaked toward the stratosphere. They burned so bright their exhaust trails outshone the moon. At their apogee, guidance systems adjusted, and the warheads dove downward. The missiles re-entered the atmosphere at over 10,000 miles per hour, creating incandescent cones of plasma visible from the ground. Russian radar operators stared in shock as the screens flooded with hypersonic returns. Within seconds, the Pershings dove toward their pre-assigned coordinates, still invisible to the naked eye. A final transmission cut through on American comms. Rain inbound. Targets locked. God bless the Republic. The night lit up with strobing flashes, each accompanied by a concussive roar that rolled across the plains for miles. Above it all, the B-21s banked gracefully, engines whispering, already plotting their next ingress. For a few harrowing minutes, it seemed as if the very sky over Russia had been set ablaze by American vengeance. A steel storm executed with ruthless precision, leaving the earth itself shuddering under the force of modern warfare. Aftermath: craters, casualties, and a shattered defense. As the American onslaught roared toward its targets, Russia's air defense network sprang to life in a frenzy of sirens and shouted commands. Inside dozens of hardened bunkers, officers barked orders over radios as glowing screens bloomed with hostile trajectories. In the forests outside Kuga and Smolensk, S-400 and S-500 launchers pivoted skyward, their crews scrambling to load fresh interceptors. The night exploded with the thunder of over 120 surface-to-air missiles, launching in quick succession, trailing pillars of flame into the blackness. Observers on the ground watched in awe and terror. Within minutes, the sky became a savage fireworks display. Russian pilots in MiG-31s tried to intercept the bombers, only to break off when their radars were overwhelmed by jamming. The confusion was total. Spotters at an S-400 battery described how the ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet. Not from impacts yet, but from the shock of so many simultaneous launches. It was a night of iron and fire, a sky seared with streaks of incandescent fury. Despite their frantic efforts, Russian officers sensed it in the final minutes. The American strike was breaking through, unstoppable, like a tidal wave of precision-guided wrath. And there would be hell to pay when it finally hit the ground. When dawn finally broke over western Russia, the true scale of America's strike was revealed. Smoking craters, shattered hangars, and twisted wreckage stretched for miles. In Smolensk, satellite images revealed 7 separate impact sites, each gouging the earth into pits over 100 feet across. Nearby, a massive fuel depot had been ignited by a direct Pershing II hit, sending a pillar of black smoke 3,000 feet into the sky. Kuga's primary airbase lay in ruin, and analysts later counted at least 23 high-value fighters destroyed before they could even take off. But the human toll was even more staggering. Early Russian reports confirmed over 3,000 military personnel dead or wounded within a single night. Some units stationed near Kuga lost half their combat strength in hours. Russian commanders struggled to re-establish communications, but with so many radar and command nodes flattened by American strikes, coordination fell into chaos. By midday, emergency convoys clogged highways leading east, carrying the wounded and shell-shocked survivors. Drone footage captured haunting images of burned-out SAM launchers, shattered radar arrays still faintly smoking, and fields dotted with shallow graves hastily dug by survivors. For decades, the world stood witness to a brutal truth. Challenge U.S. air, and your heartland may pay in blood, fire, and thousands of lost lives before the sun rises again. In Moscow, there was stunned silence. In Washington, there was cold resolve. For every nation watching from the sidelines, there was a chilling takeaway. Provoke the arsenal of the United States, and you risk gambling everything on surviving a night you may not see through to dawn. What do you think? Was America right to strike so forcefully? Share your thoughts below.